Hello, hola. This is exciting. Look what I have, guys. Yeah, I'm just going to jump straight into it. I'm going to start with this one. And hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. Also, I haven't read these magazines yet. I've got them. And we're going through it together. Some of these date back, look, 2022, 20, 23, so some of you might already know these stories. Yes, let's get into it. Roden family massacre. 8 members of the same family were executed while they slept. But who committed such a heinous act? Dana and Chris Roden Sr., Clarence Roden and Hannah Gilly, Christopher Roden Jr., Hannah May Roden, Kenneth Roden, and Gary Roden. Pike County, Ohio, is home to multi-generational families who enjoy a peaceful life in the sprawling Appalachian landscape. The Roden family were a shining example of a traditional American unit who had settled on the rural and rugged terrain. The extended family all owned mobile homes in close proximity to one another and were, by all accounts, beloved members of their community. But on April 22nd, 2016, local law enforcement received an early morning distress call from a woman named Bobby Jo Manley. She was visiting the various homes scattered along a stretch of Union Hill Road, but when she entered the home of her former brother-in-law Christopher Roden Sr., she was met with a scene of utter devastation. Recordings of the 911 call reveal Manley screaming, "There's blood all over the house. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom and it looks like somebody has beaten the hell out of him." It was 7:49 a.m, but he hadn't just been beaten. Christopher Roden Sr., 40, had been murdered, shot at point-blank range. He wasn't the only victim either. His cousin Gary was also found dead inside the home with a gunshot wound to his head. And there were further horrors to come when Bobby Jo and her brother went to a second family residence. They were greeted by more bloodshed. Christopher's ex-wife Dana, 37, was discovered dead, along with 2 of her 3 children, Hannah, 19, and Christopher Roden Jr., 16. Investigators found Hannah's newborn daughter alive next to her mother's body. Hannah was also a mother to a 2-year-old daughter, but she was staying at her dad, Edward Wagner's home at the time of the killings. At a third residence on Union Hill Road, police found the bodies of Christopher and Dana's eldest child, Clarence Roden, 20, and his fiancée, Hannah Gilly, also 20. Their 6-month-old and 3-year-old sons were found unharmed next to their parents' bodies. Within minutes of the initial 911 call, emergency services swarmed the area and cordoned off the road and issued an alert to the local community. Fearing the murders could potentially be a work of a shooter who was still at large, word quickly spread of the massacre, with 7 people already dead horrific way I have ever seen in my 20 plus years. As the day drew to a close, with no more casualties reported, Ohio's Attorney General Mike DeWine launched the most extensive investigation in Ohio's history, bringing together local law enforcement headed by Sheriff Reeder and the FBI. He was determined to uncover what had led to the Roden family massacre. Laid to rest, 3 funeral services were held for the slain, the first being Gary's on the 28th of April, followed by Hannah Gillies on the 1st of May. The remaining 6 funerals took place on the 3rd of May. The community were unified in their disbelief and grief, and thousands attended the Rodens Memorial Service, where balloons were released in their memory, and surviving members of the family paid tribute to their loved ones. Those survivors were now tasked with coming to terms with an unfathomable grief. Kendra Roden, Kenneth's daughter, addressed the mourners, saying, "Each of them lived full, wonderful lives, even though they were taken too soon. They were the best people to know, and they were all kind and full of love." Kenneth's ex-wife, Stacey Rigsby, said, "We pray for quick justice and that a tragedy of this magnitude never touches any of your families." Meanwhile, based on the lack of forensic evidence recovered at the scenes, police believed that the perpetrators knew the territory and had meticulously planned the murders. Mike DeWine told the waiting press, "This was a pre-planned execution of 8 individuals. It was a sophisticated operation, and those who carried it out were trying to do everything they could to hinder the investigation and their prosecution." Dana Roden's father, Leonard Manley, gave an interview in which he claimed the killers must have been known to the family, citing the lack of forced entry and the fact that Dana owned 2 attack dogs. Experts even suggested that the crime scenes bore the hallmarks of a professional operation. This line of thinking was bolstered days later when, on the 25th of April, investigators got their first major break in the case. Criminal operation. At 3 of the crime scenes, they made a shocking discovery: industrial-sized marijuana farms, plus equipment for breeding and housing birds for cockfighting. Rumours began to swirl that a drug cartel potentially played a role in the murders, and that the Rodens were far from innocent victims. Forced to address the allegations, surviving family members acknowledged the marijuana, but said that they were unaware of the scale of the operation. Locals began to speak freely to the press, accusing Sheriff Reeder of having full knowledge of the marijuana farms belonging to the Rodens, and revealing Pike County was openly known to be a drug pipeline. In initial suspects, authorities maintained that they were conducting a fact-finding mission. Suspicion had fallen on the Wagners when they moved from Ohio to Alaska soon after the killings. While the sudden departure seemed odd, Edward explained that he wanted to shield his daughter from the media intrusion. He and his family were committed to protecting her and bringing her up far away from the place where her mother had been brutally murdered. But it wasn't just the Wagner family who were being looked at. The Rodens' extended family were being subjected to multiple searches and interrogations. But in November 2018, 2.5 years after the killings, there was a major breakthrough. Sheriff Reeder told a press conference they did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully, but not carefully enough. Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of one family. In separate locations, the Wagners were arrested in connection with their deaths. Each of them was charged with 8 counts of murder, and each faced the death penalty if convicted. They were also charged with conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and interception of communications. The first of the Wagner family to plead not guilty was Edward, swiftly followed by his mum, dad, and brother, with 4 former members of their own community charged. Coupled with the time frame in which the arrests were made, locals remained unconvinced of the Wagners' guilt. Behind the scenes, however, authorities had been building a case against the Wagners for years. Angela Knepper, who acted as a special prosecutor for the case, revealed that the Wagners had contingency plans in place in the event they were caught and needed to escape. Communications showed that they were prepared to take deadly revenge against anyone who went against them, including Mike DeWine and Sheriff Reeder, who revealed they were aware of the threat and had taken protective measures. Court documents began to paint a picture of 2 families engaged in a dangerous feud, with the custody of a child at the centre, and Edward Wagner, the aggrieved former boyfriend. He and Hannah had first began a sexual relationship when she was just 13 years old and he was 20. At 15, she gave birth to their daughter, but the couple's relationship came to a volatile end. While Edward became enraged when Hannah met someone else who she conceived a second child with, he asked Hannah to pretend that he was the father of her second child, which she refused. Billy's mother. Despite maintaining she had no knowledge of the family and did not know who killed them, Frederica had purchased 2 bulletproof vests for her son. However, charges against her were eventually dismissed. Angela's mother, Rita Newcomb, who was a notary, was also brought into court, charged with 3 counts of forgery relating to 3 separate custody documents. As Rita's case awaited a trial date, rumours of a shock twist began to leak out. Rita was taking a plea deal. In December 2019, she pleaded guilty to 1 misdemeanor of obstructing official business and took a deal in exchange for giving evidence against her family. At her hearing, she tearfully expressed regret, explaining, "I just felt that it's not a good Christian thing to lie, and I couldn't live with it no more." She confirmed what investigators suspected, that the custody documents that gave Hannah's daughter over to Edward were forged and she had never signed her name on the documents. 5 other felony charges against Rita were dismissed. She also admitted that Angela had asked her to lie. But it would be yet another year before another breakthrough in that she might be the one that killed him and just set it all up. I'm sure that's what they're saying. Husband confesses to wife's murder. A 29-year-old man has admitted to murdering his wife 6 months after she gave birth to their first child after an IVF struggle. The body of primary school teacher Abby Fisher was found in undergrowth in South Yorkshire on Sunday, 10th of July. 3 days after she disappeared, just before midnight, from her home in Castleford, West Yorkshire. She had been strangled. Last month, Matthew Fisher pleaded guilty at Leeds Crown Court. At time of press, he had not given a motive for his actions. He is due to be sentenced in November, but the judge has warned he will get life. US woman on trial for baby snatch killing. A Texas woman has gone on trial for allegedly stabbing her pregnant friend to death and stealing her unborn child. Taylor Parker, 29, was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping after the body of Reagan Hancock, 21, who was 7 months pregnant, was found in her home in New Boston in October 2020. She had sustained more than 100 stab wounds, good lord, and been hit with a hammer before the baby was cut from her womb. Parker was friends decided to call it a night and called a taxi driver named Juan David Cuellar, who they had hired before. The car was not ordered through the app he worked for, but arranged privately. He took Debani and her friends got into a separate taxi, possibly because they had argued. Around 4 a.m, Debani, after changing destinations a couple of times, demanded to get out of the cab. The driver says she was belligerent, and some reports say he claimed she groped him. He let her out on a busy main road called the Highway of Death. Cuellar took an eerie photo of her as she stood by the road that has gone viral in Mexico, and that became the haunting image of missing and murdered women and girls. Debani is wearing a long skirt, trainers, and a face mask, and looks vulnerable against the dark night and open road. Horrified, Debani made her way down the road and then appeared several times on a motel's CCTV, wandering around the grounds where there was an empty swimming pool, a garden and an abandoned restaurant. Though the motel was open for business and there were guests in the lobby area, then she seemed to disappear. The motel and grounds were searched several times, and in fact local police used the premises as a makeshift HQ. It wasn't until staff reported a foul odour coming from an underground water tank that Debani's decomposing body was found, submerged 12 feet underwater. She was only identified by the cross she wore around her neck. A first autopsy found she had not died from drowning, but from asphyxia. The second autopsy, ordered by her parents, concluded she had been sexually assaulted and met with foul play. Her father, Mario Escobar, has publicly pointed a finger at Juan David Cuellar and claims that CCTV shows him groping Debani's chest before she fled his car. However, the footage is nearly impossible to decipher. The taxi driver says he didn't see her again after he took her picture, which he says was to prove she was alive and well when he left her on the roadside. It's been reported he has a criminal history, but has not been accused by the authorities of being involved and denies any wrongdoing. Gender violence. Statistics estimate there are 10 women killed in Mexico every day, and Nuevo Leon has a shockingly high number of missing and murdered girls and women between the ages of 10 and 19. It is also home to many drug cartels and criminal gangs. Mexican women have been protesting against gender violence for the last 3 years in cities around the country, demanding more action from politicians and police, and claiming corruption gets in the way of women's safety and justice. After Debani's death, the streets were full of furious women with place cards screaming, "Mexico femicide," and once again crying out for more urgent and effective response. The marches have drawn comparisons with the demonstrations that took place after the murder of Sarah Everard in London last March, after women and allies demanded an urgent review of women's safety, especially when out on their own using the tag "Reclaim the Street." phoning around her friends, who had no answers. Local police, volunteer searchers, helicopters and the FBI were all involved in the hunt for Kylie over the following days. Rumours swept through Truckee that Kylie had been murdered, possibly by one of the men in their 20s giving out drugs at the event. And police gave a statement saying they believed she had been abducted because she and her car were missing and no one had seen her leave the campsite. Despite several appeals for party attendees to come forward with any information, the reaction, or lack of, was dubbed a wall of silence and added to the suspicion of foul play. Tragic find. The truth seems likely to be far more prosaic, but no less horrible. On 22nd of August, Kylie's submerged car and lifeless body were found 14 feet under Prosser Reservoir, close to the location of the party and where her phone had last pinged. Although many argued that Kylie knew the rural roads well and could navigate the 12-mile journey, even while under the influence of alcohol, others argued it was all too easy to swerve off the roads in the dark. Her cause of death remains unknown. Kylie's family and the community were devastated at her death. She was about to start music college, having graduated school a year early, as she was so talented and was a much loved, fun and warm girl. But they are eternally grateful to the incredible search and recovery dive team, TikTok Heroes Adventures with Purpose, a voluntary organisation that searches for missing people in water using high-tech equipment and expert divers. Since 2019, they have retrieved no fewer than 24 bodies and vehicles, some accidents, some suspected murders, and some possible suicides. AWP founders Doug Bishop and Nick Rinn are always quick to give thanks to law enforcement, who in turn are always publicly full of praise for AWP. It is an amicable and collaborative relationship and has been widely applauded. Doug Bishop said on AWP's YouTube channel, which has 1.6 million subscribers, after finding Keely's body, "The sheriffs have been incredible to work with. We understand the resource we provide and what our unique skill set is. It's an honour to help agencies and families across the country." Kylie's death has elevated the profile of AWP, which is largely funded by public donations and will, without doubt, lead to more missing, murdered loved ones being found. Anatomy of a crime scene. Saskatchewan stabbings. I really hope I've said that right. On 4th of September, Canadians were rocked to their core by a mass stabbing incident, which would be declared one of the deadliest massacres the country has ever seen. 10 people died and 18 more were injured in the James Smith Cree Nation Indigenous community and the village of Weldon in Saskatchewan, as brothers Damien and Miles Sanderson went on a rampage, but they would both be dead within days. Damien, 31, and Miles, 32, were quickly identified as the prime suspects and were declared wanted on charges of first-degree murder. The of violent crimes and addiction issues. Possible motives. In-laws killed. At time of press, the Sandersons' motives for killing 10 people and injuring 18 more remain unknown. Police believe only a portion of the stabbings were targeted, including Miles's in-laws, with the others being random, either as part of a killing spree or because victims attempted to intervene in the initial attacks. Investigations. Previous violence. Following the attack, hundreds of police and investigators were drafted in to examine the multiple crime scenes for evidence. It has been suggested that rural communities had been plagued with crimes related to crystal meth. These acts of violence have to stop now, said Reserve Chief Wally Burns. We're going to protect our community and fight against drugs and alcohol. Terror. Miles was known to be an outcast from the indigenous community, and as police built up a picture of the events, they believed he committed most of the attacks. Witnesses say he was kicking down doors and stabbing people. The terrified residents barricaded themselves in while police were called. It was also thought that Miles killed his own brother after Damien attempted to stop the random stabbings. Urgent care. Overwhelmed. In the aftermath of the vicious attacks, the local hospitals were inundated with people requiring attention. Air ambulances were dispatched to the more remote areas, while others were taken by road. Location: isolated communities. The mass stabbing took place in the remote James Smith Cree Nation indigenous community, which has a population around 2,000, and the 200-person town of Weldon in the Saskatchewan province in Western Canada. Reports first came in around 5:40 a.m. and the police told residents to stay indoors. A few hours later, it was established that at least one of the suspects had escaped in a vehicle, which was later run off the road by police. Adnan Saeed freed after 23 years. Adnan Saeed's murder conviction has been overturned, but he still faces the prospect of a retrial. When Adnan Saeed took his first steps outside a Baltimore courthouse last month, he looked shell-shocked and then elated. Surrounded by photographers and supporters, he appeared overwhelmed by the jubilant cheers of the crowd and the relentless camera flashes. Adnan had spent 23 years in prison for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Hae Min Lee. Tried as an adult, aged 17, he was convicted, seemingly on very little evidence, of murder, kidnapping, robbery, and false imprisonment. He was sentenced to life plus 30 years and wasn't sure he would ever walk free again. And he may not have done if it hadn't been for a podcast taking up his case. Made in 2014, Serial captured the imagination of a true crime audience and brought worldwide attention to Adnan's cause. The makers of the pod, particularly host and journalist Sarah Koenig, raised serious concerns about the investigation and conviction. And now the state concurs that Adnan's conviction was unsafe. On 19th of September, Judge Melissa Finn career. She emigrated with her mother and brother to the USA when she was 12. She enrolled at Woodlawn High School in Baltimore, Maryland. And in August 1995, at the start of 9th grade, met Adnan Saeed, then aged 14. 3 years later, in March 1998, they had started dating, but Hay had ended the relationship within 8 months. They got back together before breaking up again. By now, Hay had a crush on an older man, Don Kleindienst, who she worked with, and on New Year's Day 1999, they had their first date. 13 days later, Hay's family reported her missing after she didn't arrive to pick up her 6-year-old cousin from daycare at around 3:15 p.m. Teenager Hay was seen leaving the school grounds at the end of her lessons, but after that, she vanished. Police sprang into action, calling her friends, trying to ascertain if she was with any of them. In doing so, they also called her ex-boyfriend, Adnan. He claimed not to have seen her since the school day ended. Don, who police spoke to at 1:30 a.m, said he hadn't seen her at all day. For weeks, there was no sign of Hay, despite searches with dogs taking place around the Woodlawn High School. But on 9th of February, her body was found by a passerby, who turned out to be a convicted flasher, in Leakin Park, Baltimore, just a 10-minute drive from the school. She had been strangled and partially buried. 3 days later, an anonymous phone call to Baltimore Police's murder squad prompted officers to focus on Adnan. After receiving the tip-off, the police started looking at his phone records, which appeared to place him at the scene of where Hay's body had been found. It was damning evidence in a case that had little to no other physical evidence. The police suspicion was compounded when one of Adnan's friends, Jay Wilds, told them that Adnan had previously made threats to kill Hay. He went so far as to claim Adnan had shown him her body in his car, saying he'd helped bury her after Adnan had killed her. On 28th February 1999, Adnan was arrested and charged, although he always maintained his innocence. The then 17-year-old was charged in adult court and represented by defense attorney Christina Gutierrez. However, the trials were a series of disasters. The first trial lasted 3 days and ended in a mistrial after jurors overheard a dispute between Gutierrez and the judge. The second trial lasted 6 weeks. Gutierrez failed to call to the stand potential witness Asia McLean, who claimed she had been speaking to Adnan in the library at school until 2:40 p.m. that afternoon, which would have given him a potential alibi for the time frame of the crime. The prosecution pointed out that Hay and Adnan had kept their relationship a secret, and that she had written in her diaries that he was possessive. They claimed that Wilds was telling the truth when he admitted to helping bury Hay's body. However, Wilds would later be suspected of being the anonymous caller, potentially to claim the reward money. He also admitted to lying years later, saying he thought Adnan was going to get him in trouble with police for drug dealing. Nevertheless, prosecutors alleged that Adnan had been motivated to kill by hurt pride. After just 2 hours of deliberation by the jury, on 25th minds of some jurors. They also admitted that questions about the validity of the phone masked evidence should have come up. After the podcast was released, there were many different theories about what happened. Some believed Adnan and Jay Wilds, who managed to lead police to Hayes' car, killed her together and then turned on each other. Another theory was that Hayes' new boyfriend Don could have been involved, while others thought the man who found Hayes' body was responsible. Some believe Adnan killed Hay out of jealousy of her moving on. In 2016, her family released a statement thanking the state for standing by them and saying, "We believe justice was done when Adnan was convicted in 2000, and we look forward to bringing this chapter to an end so we can celebrate the memory of Hay instead of celebrating the man who killed her." But that wasn't to be. As part of a new trial of juvenile convictions in Maryland, a fresh investigation began in 2021. Prosecutors announced last month that new information pointed to the possible involvement of two alternative suspects, as well as evidence that may not have been disclosed by Adnan's lawyers. The investigation also identified the data from the mobile phone towers as unreliable, saying there were significant issues with it. On 19th September, Adnan was brought before a judge, and his conviction was vacated, allowing him to walk free. But prosecutors have been clear they don't necessarily believe he is innocent. Instead, they claim to be waiting on DNA evidence. Hayes' family were upset that prosecutors hadn't given them enough warning of what was to take place. Hayes' brother, young Lee, had to join the hearing online from work. He has said that the twists and turns of the case over the last 20 years have caused great harm. "It's killing me and killing my mother," he told reporters. Prosecutors were given 30 days to decide whether to charge Saeed, now 41. Again, Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby said, "Saeed deserves a new trial where he is adequately represented and the latest evidence presented." And though lawyer Erica Suter said Adnan was amazed to have left prison after spending more than half his life in cells, the last words lay with Hayes' family. They expressed frustration that as millions of people listened to Serial and enjoyed trying to decipher the mystery, for them it was reality. Mr. Lee told the court, "This is not a podcast for me. This is real life, a never-ending nightmare for 20 plus years." Asia McLean. Young Kim, mother of Hae Min Lee. Adnan's brother Yusuf and mother Shamim. The alternative suspects. The two alternative suspects in Hayes' killing have not been named, although both were known to the initial murder investigators in 1999. Neither were ruled out, nor were they disclosed to the defence. Both have criminal records. One attacked a woman in her car, and the other is a convicted serial rapist. It has been reported one of the suspects had even threatened to kill Hae around the time of her murder, allegedly saying he would make her disappear. Prosecutors have stated